Gene Simmons first encountered Shannon Tweed at the Playboy Mansion in 1983. He married her after 28 years. However, their 2011 nuptials were not about love. Covering up a scandal that nearly ruined his family was the goal. Conversations never intended for public consumption are revealed in recently unearthed video from their reality program. A plagiarism scandal involving his kid was discovered. In 2025, legal records refer to events involving female employees. Despite his colorful reputation, the man who claimed to have slept with 4,800 women is now facing far more serious repercussions. Not all of Gene Simmons was Gene Simmons. He was born in Haifa, Israel, on August 25, 1949, under the name Kamwitz. His mom, Flora Klein, had just escaped from hell. Born in 1925 in Hungary, she had just managed to escape the Nazi concentration camps. In 1946, Jokiel Witz, his father, once also fled Hungary and wed Flora. In 1947, just before the State of Israel was established, they relocated there, although British forces continued to obstruct their path. Their past was filled with suffering, and that suffering subtly permeated everything Haim would become. Things worsened by the time he was 6 in 1955. The primary cause of his parents' divorce was their lack of financial resources. His dad remained in Israel. He was reared by his mother alone in Tyrat Carmel. She sewed buttons in factories almost every day in order to provide for them. For dinner, they occasionally ate nothing but bread and milk. Haim was already making an effort to assist at the age of 7. Gathered wild fruit with a companion and sold it by the side of the road. He was aware of the meaning of effort. Using an army blanket, he created his first winter jacket. There was nothing he could do, but the cold didn't care. In order to sleep in an empty house, he frequently sobbed himself to sleep because his mother worked till late at night. It wasn't much simpler at school. His differences caused him to be teased by other children. He entered the school with part of the same hatred his mother had fled, even in post-war Israel. However, he was also discovered by another. His escape came from American comic books, such as Spider-Man and Superman. Despite his inability to read English, he made an effort. He was able to speak Turkish, Hungarian, and Hebrew by the age of 7. And because he wanted to comprehend the heroes in those comics, he was now covertly learning English as well. Those stories offered him something to cling to in a post-war world where food was scarce and hope seemed elusive. The pain was constant, even if his mother didn't discuss her experiences much. It began to make more sense to Haim by 1957. When the Nazis made her work picking potatoes in fields while armed troops looked on, she was only 14 years old. Her clothing was cross-marked. Going from camp to camp, witnessing her world disappear one family member at a time. She didn't have to say a word about it. Her tendency to cry without cause, her overprotectiveness, and her silence. Haim comprehended. It also left him with something. A need to avoid feeling helpless. So that no one can ever witness him breaking. In 1957, Flora took a decision that would make all the difference. She fled Israel with Haim, then 8 years old, and very little. Without any money, no English, and no family waiting for them, they arrived in Queens, New York. His father stayed behind, got married again, and made a new life for himself. He was never seen again by Haim. He started again and changed his name to Eugene Klein. He was astonished by TV dinners and flush bathrooms, but adjusting wasn't simple. In Brooklyn Industries, Flora put in long hours, up to 15 hours a day. Gene had to find a new world to navigate and take care of himself with babysitters. He spent some time at a Jewish school, but he didn't fit in. He then enrolled in a public school. Earned a diploma from Newtown High in 1967. Children initially made fun of him for his speech patterns. Everywhere he went, he felt alienated by his accent. He didn't let that break him, though. Marketed cacti door to door. Just as he had done in Israel, he plucked fruit once more. He put forth more effort in response to each insult and rejection. By watching TV and reading more comics, he began to pick up English more quickly. At that point, his pop culture addiction blew up. At the age of 9, he legally changed his name once more to Gene Klein in 1959. He named Gene after cowboy performers such as Gene Autry. Even though he and his mother and cousins still shared a small apartment, he was now fully committed to being American. Television, particularly the Ed Sullivan program, captured his heart. Something ignited inside of him on February 9, 1964, when the Beatles made their appearance. That's the life he desired. He desired the stage and the spotlight. Inside, he still felt like the boy who wanted to fit in, even if it meant pretending to be British and mimicking the Beatles' accents. Girls enjoyed it. He was experiencing the untidy transitions of adolescence and was uneasy. But he was becoming more and more charming. Gene took any job that came his way in the 1960s. He sliced meat for butcher shops. He was a behind-the-counter deli worker. He saved every cent of his meager $1,025 hourly wage. He had learned to be frugal from poverty. Even at gatherings, he avoided drinking alcohol. He observed how inebriated and careless older men became. He continued to be alert. This is how he attracted women. It was his own words. When others lost their clarity, he applied it. He began to learn how to play the guitar and practiced hard. Once he saw the Beatles on television, he was hooked. While still in school, he started forming little bands and laying the foundation for his future. Sullivan County Community College was his first stop in 1968. He pursued school, earned an associate's degree by 1970, and even worked as a sixth-grade teacher in Spanish Harlem, earning $75 a week. He wasn't passionate about the classroom, though. In 1970, he started a band called Rainbow with Paul Stanley, which quickly changed its name to Wicked Lester. During the day, they worked various occupations, and at night, they performed at clubs. In fact, Gene was employed by a fashion magazine. Using the Hungarian, Turkish, and Spanish he learned from neighbors and babysitters as a child, he also performed translation work. However, his soul was in music. He experimented with various sounds and even produced a few solo tracks under his own name. He continued to send money to his mother while bearing the burden of her survival and all that she had lost in 1945. Even his fans were taken aback by the next portion of his story. Gene Simmons claims that in 1963, at the age of nearly 14, he lost his virginity. He worked as a newspaper route child. Just before Christmas, he knocked on a customer's door one snowy evening. She replied, in a flimsy nightgown, and with tears in her eyes. She had a husband and wife. And what came next? Later, in his book, he went into much detail. And his sexual life was far from over. Gene Simmons joined forces with Paul Stanley in 1970. Wicked Lester was the band they created with Steve Coronel, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zarella. It had an odd rock and folk sound to it. Formed in the erratic New York City music scene. They had completed recording a full album at Jimi Hendrix's Electric Lady Studios by October 15, 1972. Don Ellis, Epic Records' A&R director, detested it, but the label had spent a lot of money to make it happen. He put the sound on indefinite hold after deeming it too jumbled and odd for radio. For Gene, that rejection was devastating. He had given the project his all, and now it was dead before it had even started. In a fit of rage, Gene and Paul dismissed Steve Coronel, briefly hired Ron Lyjak, and then closed Wicked Lester. It wasn't the end, though. Following Kiss's rise to fame, Gene and Paul purchased the old Wicked Lester tapes in 1977 for $138,000 in order to ensure their release. They were worried that the outdated sound would detract from the tough image they were now creating. However, tracks like She and Love Her All I Can were later discovered through bootlegs that were posted online, which Kiss would re-record later without giving the original lineup credit. The result of that band's failure was something greater. They were done with compromise by January 1973. A seasoned drummer from bands like Lips and Chelsea named Peter Criss posted an ad in the Rolling Stone, which they discovered. He joined at once. Ace Frehley was then discovered by means of a Village Voice advertisement. Together, the four of them made something quite different. This was not going to be your average rock group. It was supposed to be a crazy, extravagant event, complete with fire, makeup, and fantasy. The glam aesthetic of New York Dolls and Alice Cooper's shock rock served as inspiration for Kiss. The Coventry, formerly known as the Popcorn Club, was a small Queens club where they performed for the first time on January 30, 1973. That night, Gene took the stage for the first time, but just 3 individuals turned up, including some of the band's female pals. No one ever forgot the sight. They developed a fan base without having a single hit song or any MTV airplay. Not over the radio, but through fan magazines and live performances, word got out. In just 18 months, they were performing as the main act at Anaheim Stadium in 1974. Gene subsequently claimed that their makeup was so unusual and memorable that it simply became ingrained in people's thoughts. It was strange and raw, and it was spreading. Produced The Demon in 1973. He began breathing fire and spitting blood on stage after being inspired by comic book villains like Black Bolt and horror movies like Black Sabbath. He also painted bat wings around his eyes. The professional had taught him the tricks. The group didn't really have a goal when they first started experimenting with makeup. Gene went for the scare. Peter drew a cat's face with whiskers. Ace transformed into an extraterrestrial from space. Standing in front of mirrors, they painted freely in an attempt to create something that had never been seen before. Fewer than a dozen individuals attended their early gigs. Crowd sizes at the Coventry varied from 10 to 15, occasionally even smaller. But the few who remained spoke. The word was being shared by children even before the internet. According to Gene, it felt odd and sticky. But it was doing the trick. That mixture of blood, fire, and cosmetics transformed annoyance into interest. There was no need for a radio hit. All they had to do was leave an impression. In August 1973, Kiss performed at the Hotel Diplomat for a man named Bill O'Coin. He was so confident in them that he said he would secure a record deal for them in 2 weeks. He did, too. By November 1st, they had signed with Neil Bogart's new label, Casablanca Records. As soon as Peter Criss received the news, he literally fell off his platform heels with excitement. Assisted by producer Eddie Kramer, the band recorded their debut album in a short amount of time. The publication date was February 18, 1974. Started out slowly, with barely 75,000 copies. However, the band continued. Over 300 shows were performed by them that year. Kiss kept Casablanca Records afloat through their relentless touring. When Neil Bogart observed the crowds growing, he realized their cosmetic trick was working, even if he had initially dismissed it. In 1975, despite not having a single significant radio success, they were packing stadiums. Gene described it as a gamble that made them famous. Gene formed an odd habit in those early years. He started documenting his sexual experiences with Polaroid pictures. A hotel key had to be produced by each woman as evidence. Claiming to have taken almost 5,000 of these pictures over the years, he boasted in interviews that he had slept with over 4,600 women. He also displayed the pictures to his guests and friends. Slick of Jefferson. Airplane described it as repulsive. Stored them all in a box, locked. After they were married in 2011, his wife Shannon Tweed discovered them and, on their reality program, set them on fire, closing that chapter of his life. Gene's sex addiction became a part of his crazy onstage persona, even though he never used drugs. He transformed disorder into a show and into power, whether in tiny clubs or enormous stadiums. September 10, 1975, was the day that everything changed. At that point, the live CD, Alive, was released. It was raucous, raw, and brimming with their performance's craziness. Every recording contained the sound of the blood, the screaming, and the fire. Throughout the year, songs were recorded in locations such as Davenport, Cleveland, Detroit, and Wildwood. July 20th, July 23rd, June 21st, and May 16th marked the album's quadruple platinum status, generating more than 4 million copies. It remained at number 9 for 110 weeks on the Billboard charts. Casablanca was spared from bankruptcy by that record. At the time, Neil Bogart was even facing legal action, and Kiss's success saved the company from bankruptcy. Alive, the album's title, was a reference to Slade's live album from 1972, which served as their inspiration. It demonstrated that the fire, the makeup, and the insanity all worked. They were no longer only an odd band. They were rock's future. They increased their efforts in 1976. With producer Bob Ezrin at the lead, Destroyer was released on March 15. He made it number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100 by adding strings, a children's chorus, sound effects, and reverse drum sounds. Darkness and screaming dominated Gene's song, God of Thunder, but Ezrin made it difficult. In August 1975, the band sent him 15 demo recordings, which he discarded nearly all of. He changed their music. On Detroit Rock City, he played the bass himself and modified the song's arrangement. Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique, which was sampled for High Expectations, is one example of a piece that borrowed concepts from classical music. Recording sessions proceeded at Electric Lady Studios between September and January of 1975, while rehearsals started in August during a lull in the Alive tour. Whenever Gene succeeded, his ego grew. Gene also made sure his own persona remained prominent as Ezrin worked on the sound. The tours evolved beyond concerts during the late 1970s. They were spectacular spectacles. The 1979 Dynasty Tour, which took place from June 15 to December 16, featured Ace Frehley's guitar shooting rockets at smoke-spewing props and Gene flying across the stage. John Elder Robeson, their technologist, produced these astounding results. They performed 92 times in North America, but something was amiss. Some venues, such as the cancelled Pontiac Silver Dome events or the scaled-down Los Angeles gigs, were too empty. Peter Criss was having problems. He became more addicted to drugs. He began to ruin concerts, pausing his drumming in the middle of a performance to vent. That's what Gene called self-destruction. By the time of the last performance in Toledo on December 16, 1979, it was evident that the original band was disintegrating. The change was felt by fans, and disco had infiltrated their sound. Families began attending concerts in place of die-hard rock enthusiasts. Gene continued to soar. Band was rapidly approaching. In 1978, things became more bizarre. On October 28, NBC released the strange television film Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. Hanna-Barbera, the same team behind Scooby-Doo, produced it. Kiss portrayed themselves at a theme park, fighting a wicked inventor like superheroes. His real-life aim to make Kiss a worldwide brand was echoed in his improvised comments about world dominance. The performance was awful. Fans thought it was terrible. Loved the publicity, but the band as a whole tried to act as if it had never happened. Because of how embarrassing the film was, set personnel were prohibited from discussing it afterwards. After being renamed Attack of the Phantoms, it nevertheless became a cult favorite, particularly in Europe. The project demonstrated Gene's inflated ego's invincibility. On September 18 of that year, each of the four members' solo albums were published. Kiss's record sold more copies than some of their actual group albums. It featured Bob Seger and Cher as guests, as well as odd covers like When You Wish Upon a Star. He wrote songs about warped fantasy and radiation. On May 23, 1979, Kiss released Dynasty, and I Was Made for Loving You peaked at number 11 on the Billboard charts. In 5 countries, it achieved platinum status and sold more than 1 million copies. The disco impact, however, damaged their reputation. As rock fans left, ticket sales plummeted. Locations became smaller. It was losing its magic. Peter Criss only contributed drums to one song before permanently leaving the band. The Fishers had turned into splits. Kiss did the unthinkable on September 18, 1983. Live on MTV, they removed their makeup. They came out with their true identities after 10 years of secrecy. They released Lick It Up at the same time, and it sold over 1 million copies, becoming platinum. It had a more aggressive, raw, and heavier sound. The gamble paid off. Sales surged, and admirers returned. For Gene, it was a new beginning. Kiss was producing millions of dollars in merchandise by that time, with over 100 licensed products ranging from lunchboxes to action figures. The firm was flourishing, but the masks had disappeared. Gene left music in 1984 to pursue a career in Hollywood. In the sci-fi thriller Runaway, he portrayed Luther, the antagonist. He was a crazy scientist who employed killer robots to slaughter humans, and he was directed by Michael Crichton. Based on his demon persona, Gene gave dramatic lines and perished at the hands of his own inventions. Peter Criss, meantime, had been kicked out of the band in 1980 due to his unmanageable addiction. Gene described the amputation as essential. Eric Carr replaced him as the Fox's new drummer. Although it was a sad loss, it gave them a new beginning. Kiss' 1989 album Hot in the Shade, which featured the ballad Forever, peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became their biggest hit during the years when they didn't wear makeup and sold over 500,000 copies, although the music was gentle and more romantic than rebellious. Although the sales indicated otherwise, fans were perplexed. In the background, Gene continued to pursue women. His personal life interfered with the band's work. He skipped meetings. He chose Hollywood over the rehearsal process. Little Caesar was Eric Carr's final album before he passed away, but it featured his first solo voice. In 1991, everything almost fell apart due to Gene's diversions. Gene told the whole truth in his 2001 autobiography, Kiss in Makeup. Over 4,800 women had slept with him while he was in the band. One of the most outrageous tales originated in the late 1970s. He dated Cher from 1979 to 1980, but he eventually fell in love with Diana Ross, her best friend. A straightforward Christmas shopping excursion gave rise to a complex romantic triangle. Cher did not forgive them. The affair became one of the most well-known betrayals in rock history once it blew up in People magazine. Both ladies remained friends with Gene, but the harm was irreversible. And then the greatest twist of all. Kiss's original members got back together in 1996. The makeup came back. All of the shows were sold out. They sold 1.2 million tickets and played 92 gigs in 75 cities. The tour brought in $143 million. Behind the scenes, however, tension was high. Gene and Paul kept more over $110,000 in earnings, while Criss and Fraley received fixed fees of $80,000 every concert. There were lawsuits. They reopened old wounds. It was a genuine success. But the issues were also there. Despite setting new records, they were disintegrating once more. In the reality show Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, which ran from 2006 to 2012, Gene Simmons allowed cameras to follow him. Fans were able to observe his home life with his long-term spouse, Shannon Tweed, and their 2 kids up close, Nick and Sophie. The 7-season program became the second biggest smash on A&E, after Dog the Bounty Hunter. A softer, more family-oriented Simmons was depicted in the series, although the majority of his turbulent history was not covered. He filed a lawsuit in 2008 when a sex tape that purportedly showed him with another lady came to light, claiming that it violated his privacy. However, the biggest shock occurred in 2011 when Gene married Shannon after avoiding it for 28 years. The nuptials garnered media attention. A fictitious proposal to purchase an Australian football franchise was among the extravagant moments that several viewers condemned the show for creating. Even so, it succeeded in giving a human face to a man who was previously exclusively associated with chaos and cosmetics. Gene continued to expand his business empire. By the 2000s, he had emblazoned the Kiss emblem on more than 5,000 items. Everything from condoms to coffins to pinball machines might have it. The brand was omnipresent. Sales exceeded $1 billion. However, in 2017, he took things too far. Gene claimed to be the inventor of the well-known devil horns hand gesture, which he attempted to copyright in 1974. According to his filing, it is comparable to the American Sign Language sign for I love you in that it is performed with the thumb out and the index and pinky fingers up. The criticism came immediately. Fans of metal were incensed. Critics pointed out that the motion was used long before Kiss by artists like Ronnie James Dio and John Lennon. Gene abandoned the endeavor a few days later, but the stunt demonstrated the extent of his control-hungry nature. He was followed by trouble in other places. In 2010, ESPN makeup artist Victoria Jackson sued Gene, claiming that while in full costume, he acted improperly during a 2009 SportsCenter appearance. He humped her and gave her a hug, she said. Gene denied that, claiming that his metal codpiece prevented it. He even cleared his name by filing a countersuit. Eventually, the case was resolved. But he ran into legal issues more than once. His Rock and Brews restaurant's dishwasher claimed him of groping her in 2016. In 2017, another woman made a similar assertion. By 2018, both cases had been settled in private. Even though he frequently rejected these claims as unfounded, they accumulated and suggested a concerning trend. His riches kept increasing in spite of everything. Gene Simmons' net worth exceeded $400 million in 2015. It was more than just music. It originated in the highlands of Kiss merchandise. Sold more than 100 million CDs and went on continuous tours. He started the Rock and Brews restaurant franchise with Paul Stanley in 2012, and it has now expanded to several locations. With 2017, he also became interested with unconventional endeavors, such as The Vault, a $2,000 collection of rare recordings. In 2018, he also became the chief evangelist officer of Invictus MD, a cannabis firm. The L. His solo tour alone earned six figures each show by 2025 without even requiring the whole Kiss setup, while his Kiss Arena football team in 2013 collapsed after a few years. At the Playboy Mansion in 1983, he started dating Shannon Tweed. Shannon, who came into Gene's life aware of his status after winning Playmate of the Year in 1982. By 2002, he had around 5,000 lovers, but they continued to forge a life together. Nick, their son, was born in 1989. In 1992, along with their daughter Sophie. According to Groucho Marx, Gene would make jokes about marriage being a trap, but his actions finally drove Shannon too far. After calling him a pig, she abruptly left the Joy Behar show in 2011. She burnt his collection of pornographic Polaroids on air after discovering them later that year. Despite the supporters' shock, something changed. They were married on October 1, 2011, after Gene proposed to her in Belize on July 26. His name was Nick, as well as the maid of honor Sophie. Was emotional and surprising, particularly after 28 years of denial. The tension was not concealed by their reality program. A picture of Gene with two models at a 2009 event in Santa Monica forced Shannon to momentarily leave, which marked a turning point in season 6. The show followed them into therapy, where she claimed she felt caught off guard and never consented to engage in an open relationship. When Gene eventually opened up, he revealed that his early life had left him with severe commitment anxiety. Everyone was taken aback when he proposed to her. More than only their romance was revealed across the 167 episodes of the show. It demonstrated the suffering and strain that come with celebrity. Gene's tough man persona crumbled in 2018. Flora Klein, his mother, died on December 5 at the age of 93. She had lost her own mother in a gas chamber and had survived the atrocities of Nazi camps as a Holocaust survivor. In 1950, she moved to Israel and later to New York, where she raised Gene by herself. He always attributed his morals to her. Her passing rocked him. He encouraged people to value their mothers on Instagram, calling her his moral compass. She is extremely devoted, according to Paul Stanley, and his wife Shannon considered her the best grandmother. Saw Gene once without the mask. His kids weren't exempt from the limelight either. His son Nick was in hot water in 2010 after his comic book incarnate was accused of copying the Japanese manga Bleach. Fans called for responsibility and displayed precise panel comparisons. Nick apologized and said the comic was intended as homage after the publisher removed it. The reaction, however, persisted. The artwork was deemed amateurish by critics, and the copying was too blatant. Defended his son, but Nick's credibility as a creative was tarnished by the episode, which also followed him onto their reality program. More issues in 2024 were caused by Gene's tendency to say exactly what he believes. His remarks on female dancers during his guest appearance on Dancing with the Stars on October 8 were deemed unsettling by many. Rather than concentrating on their performances, he focused on their beauty. A comment about Chandler Kinney's glasses fogging up went viral for all the wrong reasons. He was referred to as the gross uncle on social media, and some asked that ABC issue an apology. Gene refused to back down. He stated in an interview on October 10 that he stood by all of his statements. The fan shipment arrived in April 2025. Fans may have the ultimate Gene Simmons experience, becoming his roadie for a day, for $12,495, not including the ticket. They would get to eat backstage, assist with sound check, and even be introduced on stage. Moreover, get a signed bass guitar. It was criticized for being tone-deaf and shameless, particularly amid hard economic times. The deal, however, sold out. A retired soldier enthusiast who paid for the experience claimed it was well worth the money. Nevertheless, the stunt rekindled discussions about the avarice of celebrities, particularly in light of Gene's wealth. The dispute continued after that. President Trump declared that Kiss would be honored by the Kennedy Center on August 13, 2025. Supporters were perplexed. Gene had attacked Trump in interviews just 3 years prior, calling him disgusting for inciting hatred. Following January 6, he even likened Trump's ascent to cockroaches emerging from walls. He was now giving the band a prize, though. Memes took over the internet, along with charges of hypocrisy. Said nothing, but the stillness was telling. Additionally, Simmons resumed touring as a solo artist in 2025. He told tales from his 50-year career while performing without the customary Kiss armor at the Sturgis Motorcycle Gathering on August 3. Not everyone, though, was content. Some people were offended by the VIP package, and some tickets cost more than $500. Due to poor sales by March 23, a number of concerts were canceled. Supporters thought he had overreached himself by putting money before the people who helped him. Nevertheless, he maintained that the enormous Kiss setup was no longer necessary. When Ozzy Osbourne passed away on July 23, 2025, Gene sobbed in a CBS Mornings interview. Kiss opened for Black Sabbath in 1975, he recalled, and he described Ozzy as a really egoless soul. In order to maintain the band's reputation, Simmons even disclosed that Kiss had once declined a tour with Sabbath in the 1970s due to their severe drug use. Fans were shocked by that detail. Gene Simmons had always maintained strict control despite his wild persona and shock value.